Chapter 1798. Gloomy and cold air pervaded the ancient abandoned capital, covering every corner of the ruins of this former battlefield. In front of a dilapidated wall, Claire scuttled out from the shadows. While vigilant of her surroundings, she began to look around. Everyone's not here yet. She immediately received a response as soon as she finished speaking. No, I'm already here. With such a voice, a gust of wind blew in the air. Alice rode the wind and landed in front of Claire. Alice, why are you only here now? Claire asked in surprise. I thought you would be the first to arrive. Alice was a wind elf and had an advantage in speed. Naturally, she would be the first to arrive. The place I was transported to was quite far from here, Alice explained. Moreover, in order to not attract enemies from other teams, I deliberately lowered my altitude before daring to fly over. I didn't think about that. Claire suddenly understood, but then became worried again. Then Linley and Fayanna couldn't have been transported to a very far place, right? It's possible. Alice nodded. However, you don't have to worry about Linley. As long as she doesn't encounter an ace general or an elf messenger, escaping shouldn't be a problem. The problem is Fayanna. Claire continued Alice's words. Fayanna hasn't received proper elf messenger training. Her combat ability isn't strong, and she hasn't undergone wilderness survival training. It's a problem whether she has enough stamina to get here. Yes. Alice sighed. I really hope your highness can get here safely. Almost at the same time as Alice sighed, a somewhat angry voice sounded. Although I know I'm the one who needs to be worried the most, it's still very infuriating to talk about me behind my back like this. Saying this, Fayanna squeezed out of a dark alley, panting slightly. Fayanna! Claire called out in surprise. Your Highness. Alice also let out a sigh of relief. I'm so tired. Fayanna approached with a tired expression. Fortunately, I'm close to the gathering point. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the confidence to rush over. Now, we have 3 people. Alice's expression relaxed a little. With this lineup, even if we encounter ace commanders like Leola and Luminaris, we can still fight them. Only Linley is left. Claire puffed out her cheeks. Seriously, what is Linley doing? Why is she slower than Fayanna? I heard everything. Fayanna glared at Claire. Perhaps Linsley was teleported to a place far away, and it will take her a lot of time to get here. Let's hope she can hurry over, Alice said hopefully. If we can gather 4 people, we'll have a huge advantage over the other teams. Yes. Claire sighed. The finals have only started less than an hour ago. Right now, the other teams should still be looking for their companions, or even wandering around. If we can gather 4 people in advance, then other than Liena Subble, no matter who we encounter, we will be able to fight. Unfortunately, Claire didn't know that apart from Lotus, there was also the unfathomable Red Lotus in this Elven Sword Dance Festival. Against Red Lotus, even if Claire's party of 4 gathered, they would still be defeated, right? Let's wait here for Linley. Alice turned her head and looked in a direction. I wonder how Noah is doing. Claire and Fayanna also turned their heads and looked in that direction. In Noah's plan of action, he was the only one who could act freely. In other words, Noah's group would split into 2 and fight for magic stones on their own. If they gathered together, perhaps the safety of Claire, Linsley, Fayanna, and Alice's group would be guaranteed, but for the purpose of collecting magic stones, the speed would be much slower. When the other teams were scattered and they gathered together, Noah thought that he would form a team that could deal with any situation. Claire, Linsley, Fayanna, and Alice would form a team of 4 and fight for magic stones on their own. That way, they would be faster. However, Noah also left a command. Once you encounter Lotus and Red Lotus, retreat immediately. Don't fight. Dong! The scorching flash shot down from the sky and hit the ground, shattering the fragile ground. It set off an astonishing wind and flames that spread in all directions in an instant. In the gale, Noah was like a weightless leaf, drifting away along with the gale and retreating quickly. In front of him, in the violent gale and flames, a figure rushed out like a bullet with a sharp sound breaking through the air. The pitch-black sword in her hand was like a deadly sickle, cutting through the air and sweeping toward Noah. Noah's figure suddenly stopped. He took a step and moved to the side, dodging abruptly. Bang! The pitch-black greatsword that brushed past Noah's body immediately landed on the ground. It was like a heavy warhammer, directly shattering the ground, causing gravel to splatter in all directions. The air was shaken because of it. That scene was like a small-scale earthquake. It was shocking. Noah, who had dodged that shocking blow, looked at Leola, who had raised her sword again, and said helplessly, "What kind of strange strength is this?" To put it bluntly, Leola's physical strength had completely surpassed Noah's and was even comparable to Noah's when his ability value reached LV3. With Noah's current physical strength, it was possible for him to vomit blood and be seriously injured after being hit by such power, right? In response, Leola just said matter-of-factly, "Elven magic of the dragon attribute is the strongest among all elven magic in terms of strengthening one's body. Furthermore, I possess the dragon blood physique, so it's not strange for me to receive additional bonuses when using elven magic of the dragon attribute." After saying that, Leola looked straight at Noah and pointed at Noah with the elven device in her hand. "You should also activate the elven device, right? Or do you think I'm not qualified for you to use the elven device?" To be honest, with Leola's strength, Noah could indeed defeat her without even using the elven device. Compared to Lotus, who had the power of the Elven King, Leola was still a human even though she was the trump card of a country. Even if Noah only relied on strengthening magic spells or a few magic cannons, he could still defeat Leola easily. However, if he didn't use the elven device, Noah's attack would directly hurt Leola's body and could cause her to be seriously injured or even killed. Therefore, the endless mana flowing in Noah's body suddenly transformed into divine might energy. Clang! In a dazzling flash, the silver holy sword appeared in Noah's hand like a dazzling aurora. At the same time, a huge amount of divine might energy also rose from Noah's body and turned into a substantial pressure that attacked the surroundings. Leola only felt a terrifying pressure suddenly pressing down on her body, making her body seem to have become much heavier. Her slender shoulders sank fiercely. This pressure. Leola's breathing stopped slightly, but her gaze towards Noah became more and more scorching. "You're really strong," Noah spoke softly as if he didn't feel Leola's scorching gaze. "Just like you, I'll also introduce my elven device to you. However, I don't think you've never heard of the Demon Slayer before, right?" "WH. What?" Leola's expression changed. "That's the holy sword used by the Saintess of Salvation?" "That's right." Noah raised the holy sword in his hand and pointed it at Leola. "The sword in my hand is the holy sword that killed the Demon King." Leola stared at the elven device in Noah's hand and smiled after hearing that. Very good, very good. Now it's worth fighting with all my strength." However, at this moment, something strange happened. Chapter 1799. All of a sudden surge of dense malice permeated the space and broke into Noah's sensing range. Noah abruptly came to a halt. Leola seemed to have sensed that something was amiss and decisively stopped. Both of them turned their heads and looked at their surroundings. The scene that entered their eyes caused Noah and Leola to stand up in shock. Amidst the ear-piercing vibrations, countless black shadows suddenly sprang out from the ground like a twisted swamp. They stood up in a wobbly manner like puppets. It was a group of humanoid figures, but their silhouettes were rather blurry. They were like shadows and zombies that swayed as though they could fall at any time. Malice that was visible to the naked eye transformed into pitch-black resentment that lingered around the silhouettes of the black shadows. In the blink of an eye, countless black shadows emerged from the ground and surrounded Noah and Leola. "What's that?" Leola stood up in surprise. "Are those elves?" Noah looked around and was somewhat surprised. At this moment, a voice sounded in Noah's mind. "Master," Aster suddenly spoke. "Those are crippled elves." Crippled elves. Noah was stunned. This was because he had never heard of any crippled elves in this world. Aster was naturally aware of this matter and explained it out loud. Crippled elves are a type of undead. If elves have too much resentment when they are annihilated, they will lose their spirituality and turn into undead that wander the land. This abandoned city used to be the final battle site of the Elven War. Many elves died, and those elves have turned into undead without reason and remain here. After saying that, Aster said this in an indifferent voice. In the past Elven Wars, although I didn't belong to any of the 5 Elven Kings or the Dark Elven King's camp, the Elven Kings were quite wary of me. Because of this, many elves who belonged to either of the 2 camps came looking for me and were destroyed by me. I'm afraid that it's because Master used me that these crippled elves with strong resentment appeared. The facts proved that Aster's guess was completely correct. There was no other reason. The black shadows that emerged from the ground immediately turned their shapeless faces toward Noah, who was holding the demon slayer, and let out a roar full of resentment. The roar that sounded like a malicious spirit from the abyss made Noah and Leola extremely uncomfortable and frowned at the same time. In the next second, hundreds and thousands of black shadows that were like a black wave, suddenly rushed toward Noah and Leola from all directions. "Humph." Leola snorted coldly and looked at the sea of black shadows that rushed toward her with deep disgust in her eyes. "A bunch of filthy things. Disappear." Then, Leola raised the pitch-black sword in her hand and fiercely swung it at the group of black shadows that rushed toward her. From the movements of the black shadows, it could be seen that they might have been very famous and powerful elves when they were alive. But in the situation where only resentment was left after death, these black shadows were not worth mentioning at all in terms of individual strength. At least, in the face of an elven envoy like Leola, even if there were thousands or tens of thousands of these black shadows, they would only be courting death. However, Noah, who vaguely felt that something was wrong, almost reflexively called out, "Wait." Leola was slightly taken aback. But at this moment, the elven device that Leola swung out had already arrived in front of the black shadows that rushed toward them. Slash! As the cold sword light flashed, a crisp tearing sound resounded. Nidhogg, who was known as the strongest dragon elf in the Dragon Emperor Knight Legion, neatly cut apart the dark shadows that pounced at him one after another. The black shadows that had been cut in half roared with resentment and disappeared into the void. With a casual strike, Leola annihilated dozens of crippled elves. But at the same time, the luster on the pitch-black sword in Leola's hand suddenly dimmed as if it was blinded. This scene made Leola's expression change abruptly. Divine might has been weakened. Noah's expression also darkened. I knew it wasn't that simple. Those so-called crippled elves had the ability to weaken divine might. No, it couldn't be called an ability. It should be said that as long as one came into contact with those black shadows, one's body would more or less be stained with filth. Witch Ji had to maintain a pure body and mind at all times in order to unleash her power. If the elven magic device was stained with filth, then its divine might would naturally be weakened. Noah had reason to believe that. If they were swallowed by the black shadows, then other than him who had endless divine might and wasn't afraid of being weakened, Leola and Aster's divine might would be plundered clean. Therefore, even Noah had to be careful not to let the demon slayer touch those black shadows that were filled with resentment. But apart from that, there's nothing else to pay attention to. Looking at the large number of black shadows that rushed toward him like a tide, Noah calmly raised his hand and pointed forward. Besides, I don't have to be merciful when dealing with existences like you. A complicated magic array with geometric patterns appeared in front of Noah's palm. Inside, a huge amount of magic power gathered. Boom! Like a flash of light, the beam of magic power exploded in the tide of pitch-black shadows that blotted out the sky and earth, turning into an astonishing impact and fire wave that suddenly shook and expanded, covering the shadows that were roaring and pouncing in one direction. Instantly, those black shadows were annihilated by the explosion of light and wave of fire, not leaving a single trace behind. It was as if they never existed in the first place, disappearing without a trace. On the other side, Leola seemed to be wary of those black shadows and didn't dare to touch them anymore. She suddenly threw the pitch-black greatsword in her hand into the air. The pitch-black greatsword emitted a dazzling radiance and gradually turned into a pitch-black dragon within the radiance. It roared towards the sky and spat out a scorching flame breath towards the large number of black figures below that were like waves. Boom! There was another shocking explosion. The flames spread out like a storm, incinerating the black shadows one by one. In the two shocking explosions, the ground unknowingly cracked open. Just as Noah and Leola were preparing to annihilate all the crippled elves around them in one fell swoop, the ground couldn't withstand the continuous bombardment and suddenly burst open. Caught off guard, Noah and Leola fell into a bottomless pit under the collapse of the ground. The shattered ground lifted up countless rocks and debris. Immediately, like a great earthquake, the bottomless pit was buried. After an unknown amount of time, the tremors on the ground began to stop. The bottomless pit was also completely buried by the gravel and debris, without a single gap. A sea of black figures surrounded the crater that was filled with gravel and debris. They were like puppets that had lost control, swaying on the spot. From time to time, they would let out roars of resentment, causing the atmosphere to be extremely horrifying. After a while, many elves who had arrived at the scene saw this scene. After a while, their expressions changed for a while, they silently chose to retreat. The first scene of the finals of the Elven Sword Dance Festival ended like this. Bang! Bang, bang, bang! Amidst the heavy sounds, huge gravel fragments smashed into the dark underground, causing the echoes to ripple in the space and didn't calm down for a long time. In the bottomless pit, Noah and Leola were both suspended in mid-air, looking at the ground that was completely buried by gravel and debris with deeply furrowed brows. Of course, Noah was relying on his own strength to fly. On the other hand, Leola was riding on the back of her contracted elf and was carried by Nidhogg to fly there. In the next second, the two of them looked at each other and immediately chose to stop at the same time. At the same time, they fell into the bottomless pit. Chapter 1800. Wang. As soon as Leola landed on the ground, Nidhogg shuddered and turned into light particles, disappearing on the spot. Leola, who was riding on Nidhogg's back, fell from mid-air. Although she stabilized herself and didn't fall, her body softened and half-knelt on the ground. Noah, who also fell from mid-air, looked at the feeble Leola in a daze. "What happened to you?" "I'm fine," Leola panted and spoke weakly. "It's just that my divine power was slightly depleted. Too much divine power was lost." Noah understood. Was it taken away by those useless elves? Although it was only for a short moment, I was indeed touched by many useless elves. Leola nodded. Now, there should be less than 1% of the divine power left in my body, right? Less than 1% of the divine power left. Leola was only touched for a short moment and those useless elves took away so much of her divine power? It seemed that those useless elves were considered a threat to ordinary elven users. "I can't believe you dared to admit your current condition so openly." Noah glanced at Leola. "Aren't you afraid that I will attack you now and take away your magic stones? Anyway, I'm almost powerless now. Even if I hide it from you, it won't take long for you to see through it, right? Leola said without looking up. If that's the case, it doesn't matter if I hide it or not. Leola turned her gaze to Noah and stared straight into Noah's eyes. Besides, I don't think you will attack me in your current condition. Oh. Noah raised a brow. Why do you think so? Simple, Leola said calmly. Because you didn't think I was a strong opponent that you needed to deal with all your strength from the start, right? Should I say, as expected of the trump card of the Dragon Duchy of Dolagunia. Even if she was loyal to her fighting instincts, it didn't mean she was a fool. This Duke Long had already seen through Noah's thoughts. In your heart, your true opponent should only be the strongest sword dancer, Renasubble, Leola said softly. Am I right? However, this time, Noah denied it. You're wrong, Noah said indifferently. Other than Renasubble, there's another person in the Purgatory Apostles that I have to take seriously. His words made Leola frown slightly. Then, she said hesitantly, that's right. Are you referring to that elven user called Red Lotus? What? Noah was surprised. Renasubble, you're also paying attention to her. I just have a vague feeling that the elven envoy isn't that simple. Leola didn't hide her thoughts. Since even you have noticed her, it proves that my intuition is right. After saying that, Leola got up with some difficulty and looked around. Leola, how do I get out of here? Noah also raised his eyes and looked around. At this time, Noah and Leola were in an underground sacrificial hole. Around them, broken stone pillars were lying on the ground. Some were shattered, some were broken into pieces. It was obvious that they had been here for a long time. The ceiling was connected to the ground. However, a large amount of rubble had sealed the entrance of the cave. From time to time, some dust would sprinkle down. It seemed that a second collapse could occur at any time. There was no need to examine it at all. Noah and Leola could tell how fragile this place had become over the years. If Noah and Leola did anything violent, the entire sacrificial hall would collapse and bury them alive. Seems like we can't break through to the ground. Otherwise, this place will collapse and bury us alive, Noah concluded. By then, even if we don't die, it will only make the situation worse. We won't be able to return to the ground, right? If Noah was alone, he might be able to break through to the ground using some forceful means. However, with Leola around, even if Noah could protect himself, Leola would be in trouble if this place collapsed. Moreover, if another collapse occurred, it would be unknown whether they could break out of this place. For safety's sake, it would be impossible to break through to the ground using forceful means. This should be a place used to offer sacrifices to the elves in the past. Leola extended her hand and touched an old stone pillar. Considering that this place was built by the elves during the Elven War, it might be a place used to hold some rituals. Therefore, there should be an entrance to the surface. In other words, we can only look for the entrance to the surface since we can't break through to the surface forcefully. Noah looked around. But we didn't see any passageways from here, right? This underground sacrificial hall was a cube-like space with walls in all directions. There weren't any passageways or doors. In other words, this was a completely sealed space. If they didn't destroy it to a certain extent, they wouldn't be able to get out at all. If they destroyed it, it would definitely cause a collapse and bury Noah and Leola alive. This situation was a little troublesome. Perhaps the elves in ancient times used teleportation arrays to enter this underground sacrificial hall, Leola said calmly. So, let's see if there are any teleportation doors here before coming to a conclusion. Let's do that then. Noah shrugged nonchalantly. At this moment, the holy sword in Noah's hand emitted a dazzling radiance that turned into light particles and condensed into a human figure. Aster. Noah was taken aback. Is this the prototype of the holy sword that killed the Demon King? Leola stared intently at Aster, her eyes brimming with vigor. It's actually the highest-ranking elf in human form. But it makes sense. An elf that can kill a demon king naturally wouldn't be of a low level. It was a pity that Aster didn't care about Leola at all. Instead, he looked at Noah and said, "Master, I know how to get out of this place." "You know how to get out?" Noah was surprised and immediately understood. Chapter 1801. Tap. 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 In the dim passageway, the clear sound of footsteps echoed around. It was like a piece of music, rising and falling rhythmically. As the guide, Aster held a piece of elven ore used for illumination and walked at the very front. Noah, on the other hand, carried Leola and followed behind Aster, walking forward as well. Leola seemed to have stopped making a ruckus, but her pretty face was red as she curled up in Noah's arms. She muttered in disbelief as if she felt humiliated. "I didn't expect that one day I would be taken care of by my opponent, and it's a man. Is there something wrong with your sentence?" Noah was speechless. "It's because he's a man that he should take care of a woman, right? Are there no gentlemanly men in the Dragon Duchy of Doragonia?" How would I know?" Leola glared at Noah in embarrassment. Her face was still red. "I've never been so close to a man before." "Well, you're a Magus maiden who has to maintain a pure body and mind." "I can understand that," Noah said hesitantly. "But I'm worried about you Magus maidens when you get married in the future. Then, that kind of thing." Leola didn't seem to have thought about this question. After a moment of silence, she said so. "Of course it'll be arranged by the country, right?" "Yeah." Noah narrowed his eyes. "So, if I really go to the Dragon Duchy of Doragonia, you'll really marry me?" Marry? Leola's mind started to wander. Her face was so red that it looked like it was boiling. Under the shame and anger, Leola struggled and kicked up a fuss again. She even started to speak incoherently. Who wants to marry a man? You're not going to marry a man." Noah was stunned. "Do you want to marry a woman?" Leola's tone was stifled. It was unknown if she felt embarrassed or if she had simply given up on herself, but she didn't know what to say. "Can't I? I really don't know if it will work." Noah had the urge to cover his face. "At least, I've never seen anyone do that around me. Just because others can't do it doesn't mean that I can't." She then realized that her words were too fake, and her face turned redder and redder. In short, put me down first." Fine. Noah rolled his eyes. "You should have recovered some of your divine might. At the very least, you should have no problem walking, right?" After saying that, Noah put Leola down. The moment her heels touched the ground, Leola immediately jumped away and distanced herself from Noah. She clutched her heart and panted heavily. "My heart is beating so fast. Is this what happens when you get too close to a man?" Noah waved his hand as though he didn't hear Leola's grumbling. He continued walking forward as he waved his hand. "All right, hurry up and keep up. Don't blame me if you lose me." "Ugh." Leola frowned. "I feel like I can't let it go." "Undoubtedly, I'm here to have a showdown with you." Despite saying that, Leola still obediently followed behind Noah and Aster. As the princess of the Dragon Dukedom of Drago Laguna, it wasn't that Leola didn't have any self-respect. However, her self-respect wasn't so strong that she felt that it was shameful to work together with her enemy. Leola only wanted to have a showdown with Noah when she was in perfect condition. Therefore, Leola wouldn't reject Noah's help because of her pride. At this moment, Aster, who was leading the way, suddenly stopped in his tracks. Noah and Leola also stopped and looked at Aster in confusion. In the next second, Noah's expression changed. He understood why Ashtar suddenly stopped. It was because there was a faint sound of footsteps in front of them. Leola seemed to have heard the footsteps as well, and her expression became serious. Woof! In front of them, a sound like a dog barking was heard. Noah's sharp senses allowed him to detect a familiar presence. Almost at the same time, in front of them, a voice full of caution and nervousness entered the ears of Noah, Ashtar, and Leola. Who's the person in front? Noah and Leola could feel that the owner of the voice seemed to have started to gather divine might energy. Therefore, Leola immediately put up her guard. Noah, on the other hand, quickly spoke. Is it you? Linsley. Amidst the surprised voice, the gathering divine might energy suddenly stopped. Immediately, in front of them in the dark tunnel, the sound of quick footsteps could be heard. Not long after, a girl with luxurious light golden hair that reached her waist and a white wolf beside her ran over. She looked at Noah with eyes full of surprise. Noah! It was Linsley. The white wolf was Linsley's contracted spirit, the magical ice spirit Fenrir. The barking sound just now was made by Fenrir. It's really you, Linsley. Noah was very surprised. Why are you here? I want to know too. Linsley ran over with a face full of tears. When the competition started and I opened my eyes, I was already here. This is a maze. Not only can I not get out, but I can't even see the signal you sent. There's no way to carry out the plan you set. From Linsley's teary look, it could be seen that this girl was very anxious to get out after being teleported here. Even Fenrir whimpered in front of Ashtar as if it had been wronged. Ashtar, who was more or less indifferent to other humans, was not so repulsed by elves. He directly reached out and patted Fenrir's head, making Fenrir let out a sound of comfort. Undoubtedly, it was an alpha wolf, but it acted like a dog. Even the sound just now sounded like a dog barking. It really made people speechless. Meeting a companion in an unexpected place made Noah's heart heave a sigh of relief. If he had not accidentally barged into this place, it was likely that Linsley would have been wandering in this underground maze until the end of the competition. Chapter 1802. In this tense atmosphere, Linsley and Leola did not really fight in the end. Leola's god's might was still recovering, so she wasn't in her best condition. If she fought Linley in this condition, it would be very difficult. If she didn't pay a price, she wouldn't be able to win, so she gave up. Linsley, on the other hand, gave up on her hostility when she knew that Leola was not fully recovered. I am a noble, Linsley said matter-of-factly. Making a move in this situation is simply taking advantage of the situation. As a noble, doing such a thing will only lower your status. That sounded like something Linsley would say. Regarding this, Leola felt both agreement and non-committal. The Elven Sword Dance Festival is not a simple sacrificial ceremony. There are countless countries that want to win by hook or by crook. If you don't make a move against me when I am at my weakest, perhaps you will not be able to find a chance to defeat me easily in the future. I never thought of winning easily. Linsley looked straight at Leola, her eyes unusually firm. I came to the Elven Sword Dance Festival with the determination to win even if I am covered in wounds. Is that so? Leola asked, puzzled. Then, if you want to get rid of me now, it should be the wisest thing to do, right? That matter is not the same as this matter, Linsley pursed her lips and said softly. If I win in this way, even if I achieve my wish in the end, I will not be happy, Malia will not be happy, and Yudia will not be happy. Is that so? Leola seemed to have noticed something and nodded. Then let's just say that I have offended you. Suddenly, an indescribable silence filled the surroundings. Noah, who had been watching the entire process of Linsley and Leola's confrontation, finally opened his mouth in annoyance. Are you done? If you are, then let's go. Lindsley and Leola's spirits were lifted as they braced themselves. Aster. Noah turned his head and looked at Aster, who was playing with Fenrir. Please continue to lead the way. Yes, Master. Aster stopped very straightforwardly, but he did not continue forward. Instead, he placed his hand on Fenrir and with a small leap, he jumped onto Fenrir's back. You will be the steed from now on, magical I-self. Woof! Fenrir barked like a dog again, his tail wagging vigorously as if he was not dissatisfied with this situation. Instead, he was very happy. Hey! Lindsley protested. Fenrir is not a steed. However, Aster did not care about Lindsley's protest, and patted Fenrir's neck. Fenrir immediately lifted up his feet happily and walked forward. Lindsley stared blankly at this scene, and after a while, she started to shout as if she was hopping mad. Fenrir! You are my contracted elf. Don't listen to others as. Lindsley chased after him indignantly as she shouted these words. Noah and Leola laughed at almost the same time. Especially Noah, looking at the emotionless Aster who was riding on Fenrir's back as usual, his heart was somewhat happy. It seemed that Aster's condition was finally returning to normal, and he was not as listless as before. This was undoubtedly a good sign. Just as Noah was about to follow with a trace of joy, suddenly, Noah felt a strong gaze on him. Noah's footsteps suddenly stopped, and he abruptly turned his head to look in the direction of the gaze. Unfortunately, before that, the gaze that was cast on Noah had completely disappeared. Thus, when Noah turned his head and looked in the direction of the gaze, what entered his eyes was the same as before, a passageway surrounded by stone walls. Noah's strange behavior attracted Leola's attention. What's wrong? Leola followed Noah's gaze and looked behind. Did you discover something? Noah's eyes flickered slightly, and soon after, he shook his head. No, it's nothing. It's probably just my imagination. After saying that, Noah directly lifted his feet and walked forward. Although Leola was still somewhat puzzled, she did not say anything and followed him. The group of figures gradually began to move further away. The dim passageway once again regained its silence. At a corner of the passageway, a petite figure silently appeared there, watching Noah's group gradually moving further away in silence. Clear footsteps sounded again in the dim passageway. However, this time, the number of footsteps had increased slightly, causing the atmosphere to become livelier. Aster, who was sitting on Fenrir, seemed to be patting his neck to make his mount move in the direction he pointed. It seemed like this was not the first time he used this method to move, which made Noah a little curious. Aster, could it be that you used to have a personal mount? As the strongest sword spirit that even the Elven King was wary of, Noah had reason to believe that Aster used to have his own subordinates like the 5 Elven Kings and the Dark Elven King. However, Aster denied it. I didn't have a personal mount in the past, and have always been alone. I didn't even join any of the factions between the 5 Elven Kings and the Dark Elven King. However, the elemental elves' world is very big, and sometimes, a means of transportation is needed when traveling aimlessly. I have ample experience in this aspect. In other words, Aster had always been traveling in the elemental elves' world as he pleased. Once he was tired, he would simply grab a mount and use it as a means of transportation. Should it really be said that he was the strongest sword spirit? I know that Aster is very powerful. Lindley seemed to be somewhat indignant. But my Fenrir is not a mount, but a noble white wolf. Why would it fall to the point of being a means of transportation for others? Give up, Ice Elven Ambassador. Leola said faintly. There is also a difference in level between elves. She lowered her head slightly and bowed to the elven girl. This was the etiquette that which Ji had to show in front of high-ranking spirits. After all, many high-ranking elves were difficult to communicate with, and their tempers were also very strange. If they weren't treated well, it would be normal for 1 or 2 cities to be destroyed when these high-ranking elves caused a ruckus. For this reason, one of the compulsory courses for which G was to learn how to communicate with elves, and even how to appease the violent and furious elves. However, this elven girl didn't seem to be as hard to please as the other high-ranking elves. She shook her head at everyone. There's no need to apologize. I'm just imprisoned here and can't get out. Therefore, this isn't my territory. Imprisoned. Everyone was stunned. That's right. The elven girl nodded slightly. Some kind of seal has been placed on my body. Right now, this body of mine doesn't have any energy or memories of the past. I can't even leave this underground maze. I've been imprisoned here for 3 years. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Under such circumstances, the elven girl continued to speak. Therefore, you don't have to be wary of me. I don't have the ability to affect you at all, and there's no need to apologize. Although I've lived here for a few years, I've never treated this place as my territory. I have no reason to blame you for trespassing. You can rest assured. Is that so? Linley couldn't help but ask. In other words, Miss Elven can't leave this place and has been living here without any memories. Yes, the elven girl said expressionlessly. Fortunately, elves don't need to eat or drink. Even if there's nothing here, I can still live here. But this is the remains of a battlefield from a long time ago. The only ones living here are elves who are like the incarnation of resentment. Even if there are other elves living here, I reckon that they are magical elves whose brain structures are completely incomprehensible. Judging from your appearance, you don't seem to belong to either of these 2 types of elves. In this abandoned city, you're clearly the only normal elf. Don't you feel bored living in a place like this? It's all right. The elven girl shook her head and said. I'm already used to it. Linley and Leola didn't know what to say. Their expressions became complicated. Even Noah began to frown. He felt a little uncomfortable. After all, it was too pitiful to be imprisoned in a place where even ordinary elves wouldn't want to live after losing their memories and powers. It wasn't that Noah was overflowing with sympathy. Instead, it was because the elven girl's experience reminded him of himself. After all, when Noah was born with the appearance and intelligence of a 10-year-old, he was also in a state where he didn't have any memories or powers, just like the elven girl before him. Chapter 1804. The sky gradually darkened. With the arrival of night, some shadows began to move in the originally lifeless abandoned city. It wasn't just in the abandoned capital. Even in the night sky, where there was no starlight, only a crescent moon, there were black shadows flashing past. Some of them even collided with each other, entangling with each other as if they were in the middle of a battle. Hiding under the broken wall, Claire, Fayanna, and Alice watched the shadows colliding fiercely in the sky. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. That seems to be magical fairies, right? Alice asked nervously. And almost all of them are magical fairies. Undoubtedly, during the day, we can't even sense the aura of a single fairy, but at night, there are actually so many magical fairies. Fayanna complained inwardly. Could it be that all the people living in this abandoned city are magical fairies? That's not strange, right? Claire smacked her lips. Apart from magical fairies whose brain structure can't be analyzed, what other fairies would be willing to live in this kind of place? Claire, Fayanna, and Alice didn't know that there was such a thing as a crippled elf in this abandoned city. There didn't seem to be any useless fairies living in this area, so the group of girls hiding here waiting for Linley didn't know that there were a large number of useless fairies roaming about in the abandoned city. However, looking at the magical fairies that were constantly intertwining in the air, the group of girls was also terrified. If they were discovered by those fairies who had no sense of reason and only attacked all living things, then the 3 girls would definitely be attacked by a large number of fairies, right? That wouldn't be any better than being surrounded by an army of useless fairies. No, from a certain point of view, magical fairies were much more difficult to deal with than useless fairies. Although useless fairies could steal the power of fairies and fairies, they couldn't withstand a single blow, so there were still ways to deal with them. However, magical fairies weren't so easy to deal with. The proof was that in the next second, Alice suddenly opened her eyes wide and pointed in a direction. "Look over there." Claire and Fianna subconsciously looked in the direction Alice was pointing, and then their eyes widened as well. On the other side of the sky, a huge wyvern flew over and arrived in the air above the group of magical fairies who were fighting fiercely. Roar, 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 roar. Amidst the deafening roars, the huge wyvern barged into the battlefield and tore apart the magical fairies. The screams of the magical fairies reverberated in the air. That brutal scene made the faces of all the young girls turn pale. That's a demon god-level magical fairy. Fianna lowered her voice with fear. There are demon god-level magical fairies in this abandoned city. Heavens! Claire's heart palpitated. If we're discovered by those magical fairies, we're dead. After all, in a situation where mythical-level elves almost never appeared in the human world, demon god-level elves were classified as the strongest elves that posed the most threat to humans. Even ace commander-level elven users like Leola and Luminalise couldn't take on a demon god-level elf in a one-on-one battle. A legion of elite elven knights numbering in the hundreds, or even thousands, would be required to take down an elf of this level. According to what Claire, Fianna, and Alice knew, only Greywas, who was known as the strongest elf on the continent, could defeat a demon god-level elf single-handedly. Therefore, if Claire, Fianna, and Alice's group were to face a demon god-level fairy, they would definitely become a feast for the other party. Only Noah and Liena Subble can deal with such a monster alone, right? Alice's palms began to sweat. We can't face such a monster. Do you even need to ask? Fianna said angrily. Against a demon god-level magical fairy, we can only run. Really, why are we performing the fairy sword dance ritual in such a dangerous place? I really want to leave this place as soon as possible. Claire complained. What is Linley doing? Why isn't she here yet? In order to wait for Linley, the group of girls waited from day to night. If they continued to wait like this, they would have to set up a tent here. However, if they set up a tent here and were discovered by the night fairies, it would definitely be disastrous. If it was possible, the girls really wanted to quickly move to a more remote building so that they could rest at ease. Moreover, we don't know how Noah is doing. Claire sighed. Is it that tiring on the first day of the competition? We don't need to worry about Noah. The important thing is why Linley still hasn't arrived. Fianna seemed to have calmed down and hesitated for a moment before saying this. Could it be that she encountered some kind of situation? That's the only way. Otherwise, she definitely wouldn't be this slow. Alice frowned. There is only one thing for sure, and that is that continuing to wait is definitely not a good idea. Alice is right. Claire nodded. We can't keep waiting like this. Otherwise, it would be meaningless for us to gather here. Let's wait until dawn. If Linley still hasn't arrived by then we have to take action. However, at this moment, a playful voice suddenly sounded. Before that, let's ask the big sisters to do Maoya a favor. The sudden sound caused Claire, Linley, and Alice's group to tremble. They tensed up and turned around, looking towards the source of the sound. At the other end of the street, a petite figure appeared in front of the group of young girls without them noticing. An innocent smile appeared on her young and tender face. But that smile made people feel a chill in their hearts. It's you, Claire said solemnly. Noah, Lindsley, Leola, and Aster slowly walked out of the building and came to a street. We're finally out, Lindsley said with a sigh of relief. I thought we'd be trapped there until the end of the competition. Thank you, Aster. Noah patted Aster's head. Luckily you led the way, or else it would have been troublesome. I'm Master's sword. Aster's face was still expressionless, but his mysterious eyes were squinting because of the comfort. Helping Master is a matter of course. Since we're out, then let's part ways here, Leola said without hesitation. We'll have to fight sooner or later. If you don't attack me now, then I'll find you when I'm fully recovered. After saying that, Leola turned around and slipped into an alley. Before Noah and Lindsley could reply, she disappeared. Noah and Lindsley didn't ask her to stay. After all, just like what Leola said, they would have to fight sooner or later, so there was no reason for them to continue moving together. Noah and Lindsley were already being extremely kind by not attacking Leola while she was in a weakened state. Leola was also aware of it, which was why she left. If she stayed, Noah and Lindsley wouldn't mind protecting her until she recovered, right? As her opponent, Leola had no reason to let them go to this extent for her. Leaving was also a matter of course. Next, whether or not Leola would encounter other elven envoys and be taken down by them would be her own problem. If Leola could hold on, she would eventually appear before Noah. When that happened, Noah thought it might be possible to satisfy Leola's fighting spirit. Right, Noah. Lindsley turned around and looked at Noah with her bright eyes. How's the child? It was used in the later stages of the Lambar War that swept all the countries on the continent. But because it was too unstable, it was sealed and abandoned after only 2 uses. Noah had been immersed in the library of the sanctuary 2 days before the finals to collect information. Among them, there was a record of that magic flame elf. It said that it's the highest level of military elves that a country can have. Apart from the tactical military elves that are no longer allowed to be used and have all been sealed, it's the strongest military elf, Noah said in a deep voice. In terms of strength, I'm afraid that even Myra's Sage Monarch division is inferior to it. Without more than 10 excellent elves to control it, I'm afraid that they can't even order it around. Why would such a military elf appear here? Lindley said in shock, then seemed to understand something. Could it be that the elf named Mauya in the Purgatory Apostle summoned it? She can even control the military sprite, which is the highest level in the tactical level, by herself. Noah stared at the evil ghost bathed in the flames of the Red Lotus. After a while, amidst Lindley's exclamation, he grabbed her in his arms and turned into a streak of light, flying towards Vera Aluka's location. Whoosh! Amidst a piercing sound, the flame whip formed from flames cut through the air, as if it was burning the atmosphere to nothingness, and ruthlessly smashed down. Bang! A muffled explosion sounded. The flaming whip was like the heaviest stick, heavily smashing the ground. Suddenly, the shattered ground was like steel that had been calcined, becoming fiery red. The gravel was directly baked into magma, like volcanic rock that had erupted, mixed in with the violent shock wave, shaking in all directions. Ah! Claire, Phaeana, and Alice were all sent flying by the violent shock waves. They rolled on the ground for a while before finally stopping. Ugh, aw, Lindsley and Alice both let out gloomy sounds. Claire raised her head with difficulty and looked forward. There, a young girl named Mauya was sitting on the Red Lotus Wraith's shoulder. An imprint on the back of one of Mauya's hands blossomed with light, illuminating Mauya's innocent yet cruel face. Chapter 1807. The flames of the Red Lotus burned on the body of the flame spirit named Veralorca, dyeing the surroundings a fiery red. Mauya didn't seem to be affected by the flames at all. She sat on the shoulder of the flame spirit and looked down at Claire, Phaeana, and Alice, licking her lips in excitement. What's wrong? Big sisters. Is this not enough? Faced with Mauya's provocation, not to mention Alice, even Fianna bit her lips and struggled to stand up from the ground. Claire also struggled to get up and stared at the flame spirit. Feeling the terrifying divine power and shocking heat from the spirit, her pretty face couldn't help but turn pale. She actually completely controlled that kind of military spirit by herself. There should be a limit no matter how exaggerated it is, right? The advantage of military spirits was that they had a wide range of uses. It didn't matter how strong the spirit was, as long as one had the aptitude, they could draw out a certain amount of power from the spirit. In other words, military spirits couldn't display their full power. They couldn't transform into spirit equipment like contracted spirits, and their innate power was limited. They could only display a portion of their power. However, this petite girl in front of her could completely display the full power of a military spirit. Moreover, a military spirit like Veralorca, which belonged to the strongest level of tactical spirits, should have at least 10 outstanding witch adepts controlling it successfully, but Maoya did it all by herself. This fact made Claire's heart bitterly cold. Even if it's an expert who received special training to control military spirits, isn't it a bit too much to reach this level? The one who responded to Claire wasn't Maoya, but Lily, who stood to the side and quietly watched the development of the situation. Maoya has an innate ability. She can display the spirit's power to the limit and forcibly squeeze out all of the spirit's power, Lily said coldly. Although that will make the sprites that Maoya touches go berserk and even be destroyed in the end, Maoya can already control this ability to a certain extent by transplanting the spell seal. Not only can Maoya use a high-grade military sprite alone, but she can also use all the power of the military sprite. As long as Maoya has a military sprite in her hand, you won't have any chance of winning. Even if I don't have any elves to use, Maoya won't lose to these useless big sisters, Maoya pouted, then raised her hand that was branded with the spell and giggled. However, when there's an elf that can be used, Maoya is the strongest other than my sister. Big sisters, come and try the power of Maoya's fool's pincer. After speaking, the magic flame spirit with flames burning all over its body immediately raised the whip of flames in its hand. Amidst a sharp whistling sound, it heavily swung down in the direction of the group of young girls. Bang! Chapter 1808. I'm the one you're looking for, right? When such a voice rang out and entered the ears of everyone present, the expressions on everyone's faces froze. In the next second, Claire, Fianna, and Alice were pleasantly surprised. Lily's pupils suddenly shrank. As for Maoya, after being slightly startled, her eyes suddenly brightened. Soon after, a gorgeous shout resounded. Magic ice arrow projectile. A barrage of ice arrows suddenly appeared in the air like raindrops, shooting toward Lily's direction. Lily's expression was startled. Without any hesitation, she stomped on the ground and jumped up. Under such circumstances, the ice arrows flew past Lily's original position and accurately landed on the vines binding Claire, Fianna, and Alice. Poochie poochie poochie. Along with a series of snapping sounds, the thick vines were directly cut off by the ice arrows. Claire, Fianna, and Alice immediately fell from midair. Ah! Fianna fell on her but on the ground. It was so painful that tears almost flowed out of her eyes. On the other hand, Claire and Alice stumbled to the ground and raised their heads, looking in the direction the ice arrows had come from. There, holding an ice bow, Lindsley stood on the top of a building. She combed her hair and had a confident smile on her face. Looks like we made it in time. Lindsley. Alice was pleasantly surprised once again. Undoubtedly, that idiot is an archer. Why is she standing in such a conspicuous place? Claire complained. Lily, who had dodged Lindsley's arrow with a leap, realized that she had been tricked. Lindsley's goal from the beginning wasn't to deal with Lily, but to help Claire, Fianna, and Alice out of their predicament. However, that kind of thing was no longer important. Lily gripped the dagger in her hand and shouted with a dignified expression. Noah Dole, since you're here, then come out. Everyone suddenly fell silent. After a while, Lily's pointy ears twitched slightly. She abruptly turned her head and looked in a direction. Noah appeared beside Claire, Fayanna, and Alice and helped Fayanna up. Are you okay? Noah asked. I'm fine. Fayanna rubbed her butt and smiled bitterly. But it was dangerous. Why are you here? Claire hurriedly trotted over. Didn't we agree to act separately? It's a long story. Noah handed Fayanna over to Claire. Fortunately, I'm here. Otherwise, you would have all been eliminated. Their target seems to be you, not us, Alice also came over and said with an annoyed expression. They just want to capture us, Fayanna said. Is that so? Noah nodded. Got it. After saying that, Noah turned his gaze and glanced at Lily, who was looking at him with a guarded expression. Then, he looked at Mauya, who was sitting on the shoulder of the magic flame elf. I finally meet you, big brother. Mauya's smile was very sweet. Mauya has been looking for you for a long time. Noah didn't reply. He just took a step forward and arrived in front of Claire, Fayanna, and Alice. He looked at Mauya, who was smiling very sweetly, and said with an indifferent expression. You were in such a hurry to find me because of Lily and Asubal, right? That's right. Mauya's smile was still on her face, but her eyes became a bit dim. Who told Big Brother to keep pestering Big Sister? Mauya had no choice but to kill you. Claire, Fayanna, Alice, and even Linley in the distance trembled slightly. Undoubtedly, Mauya was younger than anyone present. She was only 1 year older than Mira, who was rated as the youngest participant of this year's Elven Sword Dance Festival. Her tone was also very innocent, but it gave people an indescribable feeling of terror. Clearly, Mauya sounded like a child joking. Every time she opened her mouth, she would kill. She was completely serious. Yet, this girl had the strength to start a massacre. Under such circumstances, the feeling of terror that Mauya gave people was very unusual. This was also the reason why Mauya was called a monster in the teaching academy. She was younger than anyone else, but she had killed more people than anyone else. She had no concept of good and evil. She could take someone's life with a single thought. It was really too terrifying. Therefore, even Lily, who had always been by her side, was very afraid of Mauya. However, this wasn't the first time Noah had met this type of person. Thus, Mauya's innocent and cruel appearance made Noah think of Ilya. When they met for the first time, Noah felt that Mauya was very similar to Ilya. Not in terms of appearance, but in terms of the concept of good and evil. For these two children, killing someone was just a matter of a thought. They only needed a small reason. However, that wasn't a reason for Mauya to casually kill her companions. Want to kill me? Noah nodded calmly. Then come. That extremely calm appearance gave everyone present a feeling. That was, Noah didn't see Mauya as a threat at all. Big Brother seems to look down on Mauya. The smile on Mauya's face finally disappeared. Her immature but cute face seemed to be covered in a shadow, becoming expressionless. Since it's like this, then you can go die. The rune on the back of Mauya's hand suddenly blossomed with a dazzling bloody light. Roar, 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 roar. The demonic flame spirit holding the flame whip suddenly roared crazily. Its whole body erupted with a terrifying divine power and heat. It no longer waved the flame whip in its hand that could burn the earth like before. Instead, like a furious ghost, it madly rushed in the direction of Noah. In an instant, the ground trembled under the demonic flame spirit's stomp. Each step of Verakorka shattered the ground where it landed, blasting a medium-sized pit, and became boiling hot like volcanic magma. In the blink of an eye, the demonic flame spirit violently rushed in front of Noah. It raised an arm, and like a meteor falling from the sky, it heavily blasted in the direction of Noah. Wherever that punch passed, the atmosphere was completely squeezed clean. It shook and created a terrifying sonic boom, causing the temperature to suddenly rise to a shocking level. Compared to the demonic flame spirit, which was the most powerful tactical military spirit, Noah, who was at least 10 times smaller in size, was like a small boat in a storm. His robe fluttered in the wind, and he looked extremely small and fragile. "Be careful," the 4 girls, Claire, Lindley, Fayanna, and Alice, exclaimed. However, Noah calmly looked at the huge fist that seemed to be formed from magma and was covered in flames. He gently lifted one of his hands. At this moment, all the divine power flowing in Noah's body turned into magic power. Like electric wires, magic power patterns suddenly climbed up Noah's arm. Roar, 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 roar. The demonic flame spirit once again let out a roar that shook the air, and heavily blasted that punch at Noah, who was extremely small compared to it. Undoubtedly, the demonic flame spirit directly rushed up to make a close-range attack with the shockingly destructive flame whip in its hand. His crazed appearance told everyone that he was going crazy. Vereker had lost control. After all, this demonic flame spirit was very unstable to begin with, which was why it was abandoned. Moreover, Maoya's fool's pincer could make the spirit go berserk, so it wasn't strange for Vereker to completely fall into madness. And this berserk state caused Vereker's power to increase exponentially. A simple punch could probably even match a demon god-level sprite. However, at this moment, Noah finally moved. His fist, which was covered with magic patterns like electric wires, blasted out without any fancy moves. Bang! Along with a muffled explosion, the demonic flame spirit Vereker, who enjoyed the reputation of being the most powerful of the tactical grade and was even sent to the front lines to fight during the Elven War, suddenly exploded into a pile of fragments. Chapter 1809. Bang! 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 Amidst a resounding boom, the lava-like rocks that made up the demonic flame spirit's body abruptly crashed to the ground. After scorching the ground, the flames on the rocks gradually extinguished, finally turning into pitch-black reefs. Maoya, who was sitting on the shoulder of the magic flame elf, directly fell to the ground. The pain didn't make Maoya cry out. She didn't even react. Maoya sat on the ground in a daze and looked at the pitch-black reefs scattered all over the ground. Her mind was blank as if she had lost her soul. Not to mention Maoya, even Lily's pretty face abruptly changed, and her eyes were filled with shock. Claire, Lindley, Fayanna, and Alice were also stunned and couldn't react. Out of everyone present, only Noah withdrew his fist. He glanced at Maoya, who was sitting on the ground in a daze, and threw out such a sentence. "Are you satisfied now that you've killed it?" Satisfied? Are you kidding me? The entire battle didn't even take 3 seconds. In the end, Noah finished off the magic flame elf, which was one of the strongest among the tactical military elves and had been squeezed out of all its power by Maoya's the Fool's Pincer, with a single punch. Noah himself was unscathed, as if he had done something insignificant. How could anyone be satisfied with that? That was an elf that reached the demon god level in an instant when it went berserk. It was finished off with one blow just like that. Impossible. Impossible. Maoya murmured as if she had lost her soul. Maoya. Maoya, gulp. Claire, Lindley, Fayanna, and Alice couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, but they still felt thirsty. Finished off a demon god level elf with one blow. Was it even possible for something like that to happen? Unfortunately, Noah didn't seem to realize how shocking his action was. He stepped forward and took out the magic stones from Maoya's pocket while she was still in a daze. Buzz! In the next moment, a magic array appeared on the ground beneath Maoya. It bloomed with light and covered Maya. Then, both Maya and the array disappeared. Moya, who was able to compete with A-Selvan ambassadors like Leola and Luminaris, left just like that. Noah turned around and looked at Lily while holding the magic stone that he found on Maya's body. "You're next." Under Noah's gaze, Lily couldn't help but take a few steps back, her eyes filled with fear. Lily, who even Maya was afraid of, had no chance of winning against Noah, who could finish off Maya in one blow. This was something that could be imagined even if one used their knees to think. As expected, Lily bit her lip and whispered, "Even if it's Maya, it's impossible for her to be a match for this male elf user." Lady Red Lotus was right. Hearing Lily's words clearly, Noah narrowed his eyes. "In other words, you're planning to lure me out even though you know that you can't defeat me?" "That's right." Lily tried her best to speak while facing Noah's gaze. "Since you can fight evenly with Lady Red Lotus in a short battle, then you're not someone that Maya and I can handle. That's what Lady Red Lotus told me." If that was the case, then it was a little thought-provoking. Why did Lily want to lure Noah out when she knew that she couldn't defeat Noah? Maya was just a child who didn't even have a concept of good and evil. It wasn't strange for her to blindly find Noah. However, Lily seemed to be very mature and wouldn't do such an unwise thing. In the end, Lily still did it. Under such circumstances, Noah could only think of one reason. "So that's how it is," Noah muttered to himself. "That Lady Red Lotus told you to find me, right?" Lily's eyes trembled, and even her expression changed. Obviously, Noah was right. "Speak." Noah asked straightforwardly. "Why did Lady Red Lotus ask you to find me?" Lily fell silent. After a while, Lily looked up at Noah and said, "Don't worry, Mr. Noah. Lady Red Lotus wants to see you." Noah raised an eyebrow and smiled. "In other words, you're just here to lead the way?" "Yes." Lily had a bitter look on her face. "This is the task that Lady Red Lotus entrusted to me." Noah fell silent as if he was thinking about something. He tossed the magic stone in his hand up and down, which made Lily's heart skip a beat. Soon, Noah nodded. "I understand. Tell me where Lady Red Lotus is and I'll go there myself." "Go there yourself?" Lily was stunned. "I've seen the map of this abandoned city in the library of the Holy Region. Just tell me the location." Noah glanced at Lily. "Then, you can leave." With that, Lily's fate was decided. Lily opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. However, Noah's half-smile made Lily swallow her words. Perhaps, Lily didn't expect Noah to be so domineering that he disrupted Lady Red Lotus's plan for her. But who asked Lily to attack Claire, Viviana, and Alice? Therefore, Noah had no reason to keep this girl from the Elfie clan. Understanding this, Lily could only nod her head. Whing. A minute later, a magic array for teleportation appeared on the ground below Lily and she disappeared just like Maya. Only then did the group of girls realize what happened. Noah walked in front of them and suddenly said, "Lady Red Lotus, I'll meet up with Lady Red Lotus. I'm going to meet that Red Lotus. The four of you will act together as per the plan we set out earlier." The group of girls was stunned. In the end, it was Claire who understood Noah's intentions beforehand. "You want to meet Lady Red Lotus alone?" Claire frowned. "Isn't that too risky?" "Yeah," Alice agreed. "That might be a trap." "I think so too," Viviana said quickly. "It's better if you don't go. Even if we're going, we should go together." Linley looked straight at Noah. "There's no reason for you to go alone." The group of girls' concerns weren't wrong. Lady Red Lotus, who didn't have any interaction with Noah, suddenly sent Lily to find him and didn't hesitate to use Noah's team members to lure him out. No matter how they thought about it, it couldn't be that she just wanted to duel with Noah. If it was Leola, it would be possible. But if it was Lady Red Lotus, no one would believe that dangerous person would go through so much trouble just for a duel. Since that was the case, they could only think of a banquet at Hongmen. No one would want to be like Xiangyu, who knew that it was a banquet at Hongmen but still happily participated. Unfortunately, Noah wasn't one of them. You don't have to worry about me. I know what I'm doing. Noah smiled slightly. It just so happens that I have some things I want to verify with Lady Red Lotus. It might not be a bad thing to go. Claire, Linley, Viviana, and Alice looked at each other and opened their mouths in unison. However, before the group of girls had a chance to speak, Noah said, "You don't have to come with me. Not only would that be a waste of time, but if it really is a trap, I can still escape unscathed. If you guys come, then it might not be so." The girls were immediately speechless. After all, Noah's strength was something that was obvious to all. Even Maoya, who was comparable to an ace player, was cleanly defeated by Noah. If Noah really wanted to escape, the girls believed that even Lady Red Lotus wouldn't be able to stop him. If the girls were to follow him, they might really make Noah cower in fear and be unable to unleash his full potential. Since that was the case, the best way was undoubtedly to follow the plan they had agreed on before and act separately. If the four of you are together, other than Lady Red Lotus, even an ace player won't be able to do anything to you, Noah said. So, leave Lady Red Lotus to me. The girls were silent for a while. In the end, they could only nod helplessly. Noah smiled slightly and raised his head to look at the sky. In the air, the atmosphere before a storm began to spread. Chapter 18:10. With the passage of time, the moonlit night gradually turned darker and darker. In the abandoned city, a large number of magical fairies were still active, making the ancient city seem livelier than it was during the day. Vaguely, the elven messengers hiding in the corners of the abandoned city could even hear roars full of resentment, which made them feel terrified. Those roars were either the cries of violent magical fairies or the cries of undead crippled elves. In such a city, the elven envoys from the Ordesian Empire, the Alpha Theocracy, the Holy Tuya Kingdom, and the Draconic Duchy of Draconia were still playing games with each other, performing a wonderful elven sword dance. Gradually, the gloomy and lively atmosphere in the abandoned city began to fade. The magical fairies began to conceal themselves. The crippled elves gradually disappeared on the spot. The sky gradually regained its light, and dawn had already arrived. However, even though dawn had arrived, the sky was still overcast, as if it was a gloomy day. It seemed a little lifeless. Although, at a time like this, even if there's good weather, I won't be happy. With such a feeling, Noah walked on the vast but somewhat dilapidated street without stopping. Noah's destination was the center of the abandoned city. There was a very grand sacred hall there. It was said that in the past, before the abandoned city was baptized by the Elven War, the elves who built this city used to worship the Elven King. Now, after thousands of years, the Elven War had turned this city into ruins, but the sacred hall was barely preserved. It could be considered a miracle. Of course, after so many years, the sacred hall had already become a place of historical interest. However, the most mysterious elven messengers of the Elven Sword Dance Festival were there, waiting for Noah's arrival. Whoosh! The gloomy and cold wind blew across the entire street, stirring up a cloud of dust and making the vision a little hazy. After 10 minutes, Noah finally arrived in front of the sacred hall, braving the cold wind. Without any hesitation, Noah reached out his hand and forcefully pushed open the door of the sacred hall. Clack! With a heavy rusty sound, the door that was 2 or 3 times taller than Noah opened with difficulty. Walking into the sacred hall, Noah was presented with an extremely vast hall. In the center of the hall, a girl wearing a military uniform of the Alphys Empire and a ghost-like mask on her face had her back facing Noah. She was like a statue, not moving at all. Looking at that figure, Noah stopped in his tracks. It was only then that Red Lotus seemed to wake up from her nap and raised her head. "Are they here?" If Lotus' voice was as elegant as a breeze, then Red Lotus' voice was as cold and heavy as a king's. Only those who had seen true despair and hell could make such a sound. Noah did not know what kind of despair and hell Red Lotus had seen. However, at least in Noah's memory, this person had brought unimaginable hell and despair to others. Thus, Noah said faintly, "Should I continue to call you Red Lotus? Or should I call you by your real name?" With just one sentence, the already heavy atmosphere seemed to have been filled with lead, to the point where it was difficult to even breathe. Red Lotus turned around and looked at Noah. Her voice seemed even colder than before. "So that's how it is. Have you noticed my real identity? Because Lotus once told me that you seem to have some relationship with Claire and Phaeana." Noah continued as if he did not feel the coldness in Red Lotus' voice. However, ever since the Fire Elf King unleashed a great fire on the entire Elysia Empire 4 years ago in a fit of rage, the Elstian family that Claire belonged to was stripped of their noble title. Both her parents were imprisoned, and only Claire remained in the Elysia Elven Academy. However, because she was the younger sister of the Elf Princess of Calamity, everyone looked at her coldly and no longer made friends with her. Therefore, if you are related to Claire, you must have known each other 4 years ago. As for Phaeana, she was called the Lost Elf Concubine because she lost her contract with an elf. That was also 4 years ago. Noah said. After that, Phaeana's treatment was almost the same as Claire's. If you are related to Phaeana, then it could only be 4 years ago. Since you are related to Claire and Phaeana before their downfall and at such a special time 4 years ago, I believe that no matter who it is, they will first think of one person. Noah glanced at Red Lotus. That is the elf concubine of Calamity who betrayed the Fire Elf King 4 years ago and stole the most powerful flame elf from the Fire Elf King's temple, causing the entire Alphys Empire to suffer a calamity. Red Lotus fell silent. However, the atmosphere around her began to change, making the air even heavier. Noah looked at Red Lotus, who remained silent, and continued with a smile. In addition to Lotus, before the start of the Elven Sword Dance Festival, Losty also told me that among the Purgatory Apostles, there was another person as terrifying as Lotus. Moreover, this person seemed to have formed a contract with a mythical elf. This was undoubtedly another hint. Because of this, before the start of the finals, I even hid in the library of the Holy Realm and thoroughly searched for information. In the end, I confirmed one thing. Noah looked straight at Red Lotus. 4 years ago, the elf concubine of Calamity took away the most powerful flame elf from the Fire Elf King's temple. It was a mythical elf that was defeated by the 5 elf kings in the Elven War and was sealed in the Fire Elf King's temple. You have a deep relationship with Claire and Viviana, who didn't lose everything 4 years ago. You also have a mythical elf that won't enter the human world and form a contract with humans. Chapter 1811. The flames of the Red Lotus were still burning in the spacious hall, causing the heat waves to reverberate in the air like invisible waves. At this moment, Rubia Elstian was like the master of the flames. She was bathed in the sea of flames of the Red Lotus. Her gaze was as sharp as a blade as it fell on Noah's body. Facing Rubia's sharp gaze and feeling the shocking heat emitted by the sea of flames, Noah knew that the Elf of Calamity didn't make such a big commotion for show. Instead, she wanted to disperse the wandering spirits of the divine ceremonial court. Otherwise, the spirits of the divine ceremonial court would transmit what was happening here to the great sacrificial hall and let everyone know the true identity of the Red Lotus. The sudden appearance of the Elf of Calamity and her disguise as she infiltrated the Elven Sword Dance would definitely cause a huge uproar. At that time, the people of the divine ceremonial court and the Ordesian Empire would most likely break into the elven sword dance and capture Rubia. That was why Rubia summoned this sea of flames the moment Noah revealed her true identity. Her purpose was to disperse the surrounding spirits of the divine ceremonial court. Therefore, apart from Noah and Rubia, no one would know what was happening here. However, that was exactly what Noah wanted. After all, what Noah wanted to ask next was not something that should be known by unrelated people. I have a question. Noah met Rubia's sharp gaze and said. No, to be exact, it should be 2 questions. 2 questions. Rubia's red eyes flickered slightly. I thought you would only ask me why I am here. That is indeed one of the questions. Noah said calmly. Compared to why you are here, the other question is more important to me. Is that so? Rubia said indifferently. It doesn't matter. I have my own reasons for asking you here. Before that, I will listen to your questions. Then, please answer me. Noah's gaze was fixed on Rubia. What is your relationship with the Saintess of Salvation, Alicia Edith? Rubia's pair of red eyes suddenly rippled. Don't tell me you have nothing to do with the Saintess of Salvation. Noah stared at Rubia. If you're really interested in me, then you should have investigated me. I believe you know about the relationship between my contracted sprite and the Saintess of Salvation, right? Just as he finished speaking, the elven mark on the back of Noah's hand blossomed with a brilliant light. Within the light, Aster's figure slowly appeared. A pair of mysterious eyes stared at Rubia. I can sense Alicia's aura on you, Aster said, staring at Rubia. Although it's very weak, it's definitely the same aura as Alicia's. I'm sure of it. Hearing this, Rubia glanced at Aster, but her voice did not waver. So that's how it is. Because you felt the aura of the Saintess on me, you thought I was related to her. There's no harm in telling you. Rubia's tone was extremely indifferent. I do have an inextricable relationship with the former Saintess of Salvation. When this sentence came out of Rubia's mouth, Noah could clearly feel Aster's uneasiness. Then, Rubia's next sentence completely messed up Aster's heart. If you want to know why, it's just like how Renasubal inherited the power of the Demon King, I also inherited the power of the Saintess. If Renasubal is the reincarnation of the Demon King, then I am the reincarnation of the Saintess. This sentence shocked Noah. Aster's entire body trembled. His eyes were filled with an intense emotion that had never been seen before. You're lying. Aster's voice trembled. The Demon King can be reincarnated because the original form of the Demon King's power is the power of the Dark Elf King. Before the Dark Elf King disappeared, he reincarnated his power into a human body. That's how the Demon King appeared. Alicia is just an ordinary human. How could she reincarnate her power? Ordinary human. Rubia sarcastically said. If the Saintess of Salvation was really an ordinary human, how could she have the power to annihilate the Demon King? Aster was stunned. What do you mean by that? Noah asked in an interrogative manner. Could it be that the Saintess of Salvation isn't an ordinary human? That's right, Rubia said without hesitation. The Saintess of Salvation isn't an ordinary human. An ordinary human wouldn't be able to fight against the Demon King. Even if this human formed a contract with the Elf King, who was feared by the Elf King, she wouldn't be able to unleash the power of the Elf King. Mythical great elves were known as transcendent existences that couldn't form contracts with humans. After all, the more powerful the elf, the greater the restrictions on its use of power. Ritual elves like the Sage Monarch division couldn't be used without spending a lot of time to summon them. The restrictions on the usage of mythical great elves were even more shocking. It was so great that it exceeded the limits of what humans could bear. Generally speaking, such elves wouldn't be able to form contracts with humans. Under such circumstances, Aster, whose power was even greater than that of a mythical great elf, had to pay the price of forming a contract with him. Not only did he have to pay the price of the contractor's life, but he also had to die from the curse. That kind of consumption, even the elven concubines who are said to have the greatest amount of divine energy and serve the 5 elven kings, can't last more than a few minutes. If you want to unleash the power of the elf king, you won't even last a moment. Lubia didn't even look at Aster. It was as if she was talking about someone else. If that's the case, how could an ordinary human girl unleash the power of the strongest sword elf without any flaws? How could she annihilate the demon king who inherited the power of the dark elf king? Chapter 18:12. Go against the world. Noah raised his head. Looking at Rubia's cold expression, Noah did not think that the current saintess was joking. In other words, Rubia was completely serious about going against the world. Could that be Rubia's goal? Did Rubia participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival to go against the world? What was her goal? As if she knew the question in Noah's mind, Rubia spoke directly. The way this world exists is wrong. The 5 elven kings control the world and bring blessings to the world. The system that governs the human world and the elemental world is no longer suitable for this world. Therefore, I must put this world on the right track. When she said this, Rubia's tone was more serious than ever. However, Noah still frowned. What does that mean? It's just what it means on the surface. Rubia's eyes flashed with a terrifying light. Everything in this world relies on the power of the elven kings to survive. Such a world is undoubtedly wrong. When there is dependence, there will be conflict. No one knows when the elven kings who maintain the existence of this world will destroy it. When that time comes, the humans who can only rely on the elven kings to survive will be destroyed along with the world. They will not be able to fight back at all. Therefore, we must rise up and fight. Rubia's voice was unprecedentedly loud. For the future of this world, we must pull down the elven kings who control the life and death of this world from their pedestal. The shocking speech caused Noah's eyes to suddenly narrow, and a feeling of bewilderment emerged in his heart. Is this why you betrayed the elven kings and came to participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival? Noah asked with great uncertainty. To take back the control of the world from the elven kings. That's right. Rubia spoke decisively. The fate of the world should not be in the hands of the elven kings. My goal is to take back the world from the elven kings, destroy the elven kings, and create a world where elves do not exist. Lubia had finally said something that was not allowed to exist in this world. Destroy the elven kings and create a world where elves do not exist. That was Rubia's goal. However, this goal was simply unimaginable. Are you crazy? Noah's brows furrowed deeply. Everything in this world is maintained by the power of the elves. If the power of the elves disappears, don't tell me you don't know what will happen. Just like in the world of Fairy's Tale, where magic was important to humans, the power of fairies in this world was incomparably important. Without the power of fire, people would not be able to start a fire. Without the power of water, the water source would dry up. Without the power of the earth, the continent would not be able to maintain its stability and would most likely fall apart. Without the power of the wind would disappear from this world and never appear again. And these powers all came from the fairies. To be more precise, it was the elf king who ruled over the elements of the entire world. Once the elven king was eliminated, the above calamities would appear. At that time, the elves who relied on the power of the elements to survive would die, and the elven world, which was formed by the elements, might be destroyed. The human world would also usher in unimaginable changes. This kind of thing was too late for people to avoid, but there was actually someone who took the initiative to create it. That was simply a joke. It was too much. However, Lubia was not joking from start to finish. The truth is often the cruelest. You can't understand the helplessness and despair when you learn the cruelest truth, Lubia said in a low voice. Noah Doria, you have the power to know the truth. So, come with me. As long as we combine our power, even if our opponents are the gods who rule this world, we can still defeat them. Noah immediately fell silent. Only now did Noah have a feeling. The elf concubine who was known as the Calamity betrayed the elf king and brought unimaginable disaster to the kingdom of Osea. She was hated by countless people. Perhaps she knew a secret that ordinary people could not imagine. That secret caused her to betray the elf king. Even if she became a sinner of the human race, she would not hesitate. Claire's wish to participate in the elven sword dance was to find out the truth behind Lubia's betrayal of the elf king. Perhaps that hot-tempered young miss had never believed that her elder sister would actually become a person who committed such a heinous crime. Based on the current situation, Claire's idea might be correct. Behind Lubia's betrayal of the elf king, there was an unknown truth. Otherwise, as the saintess, Lubia had no reason to betray the 5 elf kings who were the source of her power. Thus, Noah spoke. Does Lotus also know about this and plan to act with you? That demon king does know the truth. Lubia paused for a moment and then said expressionlessly. In a sense, we have the same goal, but the methods we use are different. I want to destroy the elf king and create a world without elves. I want to free the world from the control of the elf kings, Lubia said softly. But Lotus Asubal wants to save the elf king and free the world from the threat of the mad elf king. Mad elf king. Noah's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? You don't need to know now. Lubia looked at Noah. If you want to know the truth, then come with me. Lend me your power and I will tell you everything. The atmosphere in the air suddenly became extremely uncomfortable. Noah's eyebrows furrowed deeper and deeper. He really felt that he had fallen into a huge whirlpool. And that whirlpool was almost completely connected to the life and death of this world. Just as Noah was deep in thought, a slender little hand was stuffed into his palm. Master. Aster raised his head and looked at Noah. His eyes were filled with uneasiness that had never been seen before. It was not the uneasiness that came from knowing the relationship between Lubia and the Saintess of Salvation. It was the uneasiness of not being able to continue accompanying Noah. If Lubia's goal was to create a world without elves, then Aster would not be allowed to exist. If Noah agreed to act with Lubia, it meant that Noah would give up on Aster. Aster was still uneasy about this. Seeing Aster like this, Noah's heart calmed down. He reached out his hand and patted Aster's head to comfort him. At the same time, he turned his gaze to Lubia. However, in the next second, Noah and Lubia's expression froze. They turned their heads and looked at the entrance of the hall. There, a girl wearing an exotic costume that looked like a witch's costume and holding a pitch-black magic sword walked in with powerful footsteps. She ignored the burning flames around her and slowly walked in. TSK. Lubia was speechless. You really came, Demon King. The one who came was Ren Asubal. Because I know that you will not let go of any cards that can be used to achieve your goal. Ren stepped on the flames and walked in step by step. A power that can fight against the Elven King is too important for you, who wants to destroy the Elven King. That's why you did not hesitate to let me, who has different expectations from you, to join you. You will not let such an excellent combatant like Noah Dole slip away before your eyes. You will definitely meet him. So, you have been spying on me all this time. Lubia said sarcastically. As expected of the Demon King. Didn't you also ask Lily to spy on me? Ren's face was calm. We are in the same boat, Saintess. Obviously, just like what Lubia said, Ren knew everything. Ren Asubal. Noah looked at Ren and said. What do you know? What do I know? That's something I need to worry about in the future. Lotus turned her gaze to Noah, a strong will surging in her eyes. Before that, let's settle the matter between us. Dense darkness surged from Ren's body like a storm. Chapter 18:13. Wang. Amidst the buzzing sound, the thick darkness that surged from Lotus' body turned into a frenzied airflow and poured into her body. At this moment, Lotus converted all the dark elemental energy under her control into divine aura, causing the phosphorescent light source to fluctuate from her body and turn into a gust of wind that swept in all directions. Holding the vorpal sword in her hand, Lotus walked slowly toward Noah while emitting dense darkness and phosphorescent light. She did not even turn her head back as she spoke to Lubia. According to our previous agreement, I can act with you, but when I fight Noah, you can't interfere. You haven't forgotten, right? Lubia did not answer. Instead, after a moment of silence, she turned around and walked toward the burning sea of fire and gradually disappeared. Noah could feel that Lubia did not leave. However, just as Lotus said, Lubia clearly did not intend to interfere in the battle between Noah and Lotus. Noah took a deep breath and curled his lips into a smile as he looked at Lotus, who was slowly walking toward him. Her entire body was surging with an astonishing amount of divine power and dense darkness. You really know how to pick the right time. I have a lot of questions waiting to be answered. I know. That's why I have to fight you before you know the truth. Lotus said softly. After all, when you know the truth, you may not have the strength to fight me. The reverse was the same. If Lotus did not solve the problem with Noah first, she would not have the strength to fulfill her wish. In that case, before that, the only choice was to fight Noah first. No matter the final outcome, one of us will bear all the burdens. Lotus pointed the demonic sword in her hand at Noah. So, let's fight here. Noah stared at Lotus. When he saw the clear determination in her eyes, he immediately understood what was going on. Today, if victory and defeat were not determined, Lotus would absolutely not give up. Understanding this, Noah took a deep breath and suppressed the many doubts in his heart. He turned his head and looked at Aster. Aster, can you do it? Her former master was not an ordinary human. Instead, it was created by the 5 elven kings to suppress the demon king. Moreover, the power of the saintess that originated from the 5 elven kings had now been inherited by Lubia, making her the saintess of this generation. Noah did not know how much this matter affected Aster. Hence, if Aster couldn't fight, Noah wouldn't force her to. Aster naturally understood what Noah meant, but she still spoke without hesitation. I am Master's sword. There's no reason why I can't. Hearing Aster's words, Noah nodded. Then I'll leave it to you, Aster. Yes. Aster's answered. Just like that, the two of them held each other's hands and gradually closed their eyes. In the next moment, Noah used the elven language to chant the contract. Cold steel queen, demon-slaying holy sword, turn into a steel sword and bestow me with divine power. A brilliant white light flashed from Aster's body, causing her body to turn into light particles and gather in Noah's hand. The elven magic device named Demon Slayer was tightly held in Noah's hand. The blade shone with a silver luster. Feeling the warmth from the Demon Slayer in his hand, Noah opened his eyes and looked in the direction of Lotus. 2 pairs of eyes met in midair, causing the atmosphere in the air to change abruptly. Swoosh! Without any warning, Lotus turned into a shadow and rushed towards Noah's direction. The dense darkness around Lotus' body suddenly poured into the vorpal sword, causing the pitch-black demonic sword to emit an ominous black light. Just like that, Lotus grabbed the demonic sword that seemed to carry all the darkness in the world. As the demonic sword flickered with an ominous black light, she raised her hand and fiercely stabbed at Noah's chest. She clearly did not use the initial form of the absolute sword technique that could release a lightning-like sudden thrust. However, Lotus' simple thrust caused the demon's sword to transform into a black light. Under the sharp sound of breaking air, it flashed through the air and directly pierced out. Noah's gaze sharpened. Without any hesitation, he raised the holy sword in his hand and suddenly raised it. Ding! Amidst a crisp sound, the sharp thrust that was like a flash of black light was suddenly deflected by the holy sword that was raised upwards. However, in the next moment, the demon's sword that was repelled suddenly turned into a pitch-black lightning with an ominous black light. Absolute sword technique. Initial form purple lightning. The initial form of the absolute sword technique that was not used at the beginning was actually used by Lotus at this time. Thus, the demon's sword that had turned into an ominous black light suddenly stabbed towards Noah's chest with a speed that was more than 100 times faster than before. Noah's heart was fiercely shaken, and he suddenly saw the light. Lotus knew that if she had used the purple lightning at the beginning, she would not have been able to do anything to Noah. Therefore, this strongest sword dancer deliberately rushed forward at the beginning, in order to resolutely launch the purple lightning, at the moment Noah's attack was repelled. With such a fast attack at such a close distance, even Noah almost could not react in time. After he reacted, Noah, in an extremely short moment that was almost impossible to complete, swung his sword and blocked the holy sword in front of him. Ding! Another crisp sound reverberated in the air. The demon's sword that had violently pierced the holy sword in front of it burst forth with an extremely powerful force, heavily impacting it. Noah only felt his sword-wielding arm go numb, and his whole body was unexpectedly sent flying by this sudden attack. The soles of his feet rubbed against the ground, and he slid all the way back. In just a moment, Lotus's physical strength was so strong that she was able to repel Noah with one sword strike. However, that was to be expected. The absolute sword technique sword dance consumed a large amount of divine might when used, and was used to temporarily strengthen the body. Therefore, until the end of using the absolute sword technique, the user's physical strength would be greatly improved. Using divine might to complement the sword technique, and then using divine might to strengthen the body, to reach a transcendent realm, that was the mystery of the absolute sword technique. Because of this, before he lost his authority and ability value, and when his strength reached the peak, enough to be a tyrant in the box, Noah would also use the absolute sword technique. After all, the greater the divine might, the greater the power of the absolute sword technique. Moreover, the absolute sword technique's potential was very high, and when used by Noah, it was definitely enough to kill a god. Of course, after using the power of the Dark Elf King, Lotus, who also had an endless amount of divine might in her hands, and had the title of the strongest sword dancer, the absolute sword technique also became a terrifying technique. However, the hastily erected defense was easily disintegrated, and Noah was directly sent flying. At the same time, Lotus, who had sent Noah flying with a purple lightning, jumped high into the air, and her body surged with an even more dense divine might. Absolute sword technique. Form 2 meteor. Suddenly, Lotus, who had leaped into the air, turned into a meteor falling from the sky, and swooped down like a thunderbolt, rubbing against the atmosphere, and heavily slashing the elven device in her hands at the sliding Noah. Meteor was a derivative of purple lightning. In other words, the second form of the absolute sword technique also had a speed comparable to lightning. In addition, the divine might used was even greater, and with the advantage of falling from the sky, the power and speed of this attack was more than one level higher than purple lightning. However, unlike the first form of purple lightning, the second form of meteor had a way to deal with it. At least, for Noah, who had also mastered the absolute sword technique, that was the case. Clang! A large amount of divine might surged out from Noah's body, and flowed into the holy sword in his hands, causing the silver holy sword to emit a dazzling light. Absolute sword technique. Form 7 biting dragon. The divine might that was poured into the holy sword turned into a spiral of energy, and covered the entire sword body. Immediately, the silver holy sword that carried the spiral of energy flashed like lightning, and welcomed the demon sword that was falling like a meteor. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.